I drafted this scheduling format for the SEC and its permanent opponents months and months and months and months ago. I put off creating the video, but I've been prompted by the comments of Nick Saban. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We break down the game we all love each and every day with you. Based on your participation, we've got the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. All right, let's get to it. Brian Kelly, LSU head coach, came out the other day, and he was talking tough. And on one hand, I admire what he had to say. As he stated when he became the LSU head coach, I came to the SEC to play the best. And so he restated that to say, I don't care who we play. I want to play the best. Give me Alabama. Give me Texas A&M. Give me, and he named some other schools. Well, Brian Kelly is going to have to play whom the SEC determines that LSU's common opponents and permanent opponents are going to be. So regardless, he might as well talk tough because he's going to have to play the schedule that's given to him. So he might as well say, bring it on. Nick Saban, on the other hand, who's been an advocate for the 9-game conference schedule, which I completely agree with. That's a must at this point. You've got 16 teams now with Oklahoma and Texas jumping on board in 2024. And if you've got an 8-game conference season, then you miss 7 opponents. There are 7 teams in the league that you don't play each and every season, and you're trying to justify and validate a championship. Difficult to do when you don't play 7 of the other teams in the conference. All right, so the SEC needs to go to 9 games, and they're most likely going to do this with the 3-6-6 model, meaning that you play 3 permanent opponents each season. Then you divide the other 12 teams in the league into groups of 6, and you alternate back and forth. So if you're upset about whom your team is going to have to play each and every season or who you're not going to get to play each and every season, understand it's not that huge of a deal because there's not going to be a team in the conference, most likely, if it's set up in this particular manner, that you don't play at least every other year or at the outside every 3 years. So it's not really that big a deal, especially if it's grouped 6 and 6 and you alternate those 2 groups. You're going to play everybody in the conference at least once every other year. But Nick Saban comes out and says, well, we were given LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn. I don't know how they came up with that decision. If there is a school in the country whose rivalries are more defined and more obvious than Alabama, there are very few. The Iron Bowl. I don't need to say anything else. It's the Iron Bowl. It's got to be played. Alabama-Auburn. The Tennessee rivalry. Legit and nationally recognized. Mid-October matchup between the Vols and the Tide. That's got to be played. And then the LSU game. Of course, the Tide and the Tigers have competed in the SEC for generations, but in addition to that, because of the 2 prominence of the programs over the last 15 years, that has become a staple and one of the highest viewed games on the college football map each and every year. So that's where they came up with it, Coach Saban. All right, let's look at our format and the permanent opponents that we are giving each team in the SEC. Keep in mind that if you've got a criticism of any one particular team, you really can't criticize one of these teams' opponents that we've given it because you've got to map out the entire conference, because if you nitpick in any one area, it may not work when you put all the puzzle pieces together. So let's check it out, starting with the top in Arkansas. We've got the Hogs' permanent opponents as Texas. That's an old Southwest Conference rivalry that I hold near and dear, as many folks in Texas and Arkansas do as well. That's got to be played. Arkansas, Texas, they are opponents that need to happen every year. Then also Texas A&M. Think about this. The SEC has pushed this narrative of this being a rivalry game for the last 11 years since the Aggies have joined the SEC, and they've played it in Jerry's world, so they've made it a standout marquee matchup. So why not continue it? Arkansas, Texas A&M. Then the other game that the SEC has pushed since Mizzou's entry into the SEC has been Arkansas, Missouri on Black Friday, so we will keep it. Arkansas, you've got Texas, Texas A&M, and Mizzou. On to Nick Saban in Alabama. Auburn, Tennessee. we've got them with Mississippi State. I've got no issue with LSU, of course, for money reasons, TV ratings. The SEC, you would think, would opt for the LSU slot, but I mapped this out months and months and months ago, and I will stay with Auburn, Tennessee. Those are obvious. They need to be played. And then Mississippi State. Alabama and Mississippi State are the two campuses on the SEC landscape that are the closest in distance. It's only an hour away from Starkville to Tuscaloosa. Team number 3 is Auburn. There's the Iron Bowl. Of course, the South's oldest rivalry. Auburn and Georgia got to be played. And then we also put Ole Miss on Auburn's permanent schedule. Let's move it down to the Florida Gators, and we keep together, of course, the rivalry battle with Georgia, the largest outdoor cocktail party each and every season. Florida plays LSU each and every year. They were designated rivals going back to 1992, so that has stayed in play, and we think that that's strong enough to keep together. It's not necessary. It's not a must, but we would like to keep the Gators and the Tigers together. And then the other third opponent makes total sense, Florida and South Carolina. On to Georgia and a couple matchups that we already noted here against Auburn and Florida, and also Georgia taking on South Carolina. They're border rivals. That makes complete sense as well. Looking at Kentucky, the Tennessee game is a must. That has to be played every year. The other ones to a lesser degree, but still makes sense here with Vandy and South Carolina for the Cats. There's LSU, and again, I have no issue if LSU is assigned Alabama based on generations of play, based on prominence of the two programs recently, and it being one of the huge TV matchups each and every season in college football. But I've got LSU with Ole Miss. That's a rivalry. LSU and Ole Miss doesn't have to be played every year, but still a rivalry. Florida and Mississippi State. Ole Miss, Mississippi State, of course, it's the Egg Bowl. That has to be played. It's one of the great rivalries in college football. Ole Miss, we have also put together with LSU and Auburn. Now, as we get deeper down the list, you have heard our explanations for most of these matchups. Mississippi State, Ole Miss, that's the Egg Bowl. Bama and LSU are the other two permanent opponents. At number 10, we got Missouri. Missouri at this point seems to be an attachment, an addendum to the SEC. They're hanging out there in the kind of southwest, but also the northwest in perspective of the rest of the SEC schools. So we want to bring Missouri back into a place where they belong. Oklahoma was a longtime Big 12, and before that Big 8 rivalry. We've got Arkansas, as we discussed before. And then we also put together Missouri and Texas A&M, put them back together because they joined the league back in 2012, coming in from the Big 12. So they played every year in the Big 12, and then they were separated by the East-West SEC split. Now we get our first newcomer. It's Oklahoma, Texas. One of the greatest rivalries in college football has to be played. As you saw before, we've got OU taking on Mizzou to renew that rivalry from the Big 12. And then we've just basically got a placeholder. So this is the first one that's going to look out of place. But again, you got to put the entire puzzle together to criticize Oklahoma and get this yearly matchup. Vandy, the 12th team we're going to look at is South Carolina. None of these matchups have to be played. They are not hardcore rivalries. At the same time, they have built up over time in the SEC Eastern Division, and they make complete sense. Georgia, Florida, and Kentucky. For Texas A&M, we at this point have seen all of their permanent opponents. They have to play Texas. The Arkansas game makes sense, and then we put Texas A&M back together with old Big 12 opponent Missouri. And the much-anticipated newcomers for Texas would look like this: Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Arkansas. And now finally, last but not least, or last and least, would be Vandy. The Tennessee game's got to be played. Yes, they are rivals, and even though Tennessee fans look down on Vandy, they are close together. They're in the same state. The history goes back generations. Got to be played, Vandy and Tennessee. Also, Kentucky makes sense. And then you've got what I would consider to be the only oddball matchup of this entire configuration, in which you're talking about 16 teams and 3 teams per team. That is 48 slots. So this is the only truly oddball selection right here with Vandy and Oklahoma. Build your SEC schedule. Leave your comments down below. I would love to hear what you have to say about which direction the SEC should go. We expect since the athletic directors are now reviewing what the SEC office has sent to each individual school. They will vet it out. They will come to a decision probably by the SEC meetings in Destin coming up in late May. Let's talk it up right here at the Voice of College Football.